So with product managers, I think a very strong product manager has the ability to context switch, but really identify problems at a first principle level and come up with solutions that are high velocity and low effort. And so high leverage outcomes. And so I think product managers, and you'll see this now, you'll see titles of product manager, PPC, which is a pay performance thing. You'll see product managers for HR tools. You'll see product managers for internal tools. You see product managers for internal finance tools. So the list goes on, which just shows you that the title of a product manager is such a versatile and a wide topic that you can really apply to almost any single thing in a company.
Hello and welcome to the Ivy podcast. My guest today is Johnny Quach. He's the Chief Product Officer at Hostelworld. Hey Johnny, good to have you on.
Glad to be on. Happy to be here.
Johnny is sitting in Lisbon, Portugal. What's the time difference, Johnny? I'm on the east coast of Florida.
Right about now, it's probably 2:30 p.m. So I'm on the UK time zone.
Oh, great. For our listeners that may be unfamiliar with Johnny, he has speaking events that he's had posted out on YouTube. So if you got an opportunity, feel free to go and take a listen to him. I personally listened to a few of them and they're very interesting. I like the one you talked about AI in the travel industry. So maybe that's a topic for a future podcast.
Absolutely. I think in general, technology is really changing the world. That's an obvious statement, but I think people don't realize how much of the world it already kind of runs. And machine learning is really just one aspect, but there are so many other kind of big innovations happening. And I think the thing with technology is when it innovates faster than its predecessors. So
Right.
that rapid pace of change is it's just creating all kinds of opportunities in the world that some people are taking advantage and others, and there's still many pockets of things to do, I think.
Great. So Johnny, tell us about yourself and a little bit about your role at Hostelworld.
Yeah. So I actually started my career as a video game designer. I went to school for graphic design and concept art. So I mainly focused on actually producing drawings and illustrations and monsters and cars for video games. That was my kind of passion when I was a kid. So I worked in video game as a assistant kind of concept artist for about a year or so. I didn't really find it to be super fitting to what I wanted to do long term. So I ended up actually starting a t-shirt company for about a year with a good friend. After about a year, we ended up hating each other. And from there, I actually took, which is very common for your first startup of any type. And after that, I took kind of the designs that I had and I made a portfolio out of it. And I started working in fashion for about 8 or 9 years. And in fashion, I worked for a bunch of skate surf companies, Quicksilver, Roxy, Rip Curl, Icon, all kinds of stuff. And just right at the end of 2007 or something like that, I decided that I wanted to do something a bit more independent. So then I started playing poker professionally because I thought that would give me the most financial freedom as well as freedom to live where I am. But the funny thing about starting your own business or playing, poker professionally or being a consultant or a freelancer is that you don't actually get that much time off. So
Right.
all your free time goes back into growing your business or growing your skill set or whatever. During that time around 2007, that's when the iPhone came out and the world literally just changed in front of me. So we went from a world where people would think about tech companies as websites to a world where people started thinking about applications and apps as products. And during that time, I took a few swings at building a big company. And I had a good friend who moved to Shanghai at the time. So we tried building multiple startups based on the Chinese audience at the time because we thought that was really interesting. And so we took a couple of swings at that. We didn't really get it right. But that's really where I got my start in thinking about product and product management. And at that time, that terminology was still not a common role. From there, I worked at a mobile ad agency where I worked on a wallet solution that was a competitor to Google Pay and a Google Apple Wallet. And after that, I worked at a company called Match.com as a product manager. And they're the owners of Tinder and OkCupid, so one of the biggest dating properties in the world. And shortly after that, I had a strange scenario where I just felt like, well, I've grown up all my life and I've worked all my life in Los Angeles. If I don't try living somewhere else at this point, I'll probably live here forever. So at that point, I had a travel bug and there were some opportunities. And so I ended up moving to Berlin, Germany, where I worked for a company called Rocket Internet. And Rocket Internet at the time and still is a very big presence in the tech community in Europe, but they're one of the biggest tech companies at the time, if not the biggest. And they were churning out new startups constantly. So I was there for 2 years, just building companies all across the world, really, from Singapore to London to Germany to just all over the place. And that was a really kind of high velocity 2 years of my first 2 years in Berlin. From there, I joined a company called Airhelp, which is a Y Combinator company from 2014.
Mhm.
And I joined the company around 400 people as a VP of product. And we brought it to about 800, 850 people. And then I left as a chief product officer there. Shortly after that, I joined the company Hostelworld, which is where I am currently. And I currently lead as the chief product officer as well as the chief technology officer, where I manage all the engineering, all the technology, product design, data science, and just an array of different functions. And from here, from here, we're trying to build the future of travel for the millennial audience.
That's a wonderful introduction. If you don't mind my asking, when you moved to Germany, did you speak any German?
No, and my wife is German, and I lived there for 5.5 years, and still, yet my German level is quite depressing.
What about your Portuguese now that you're in Portugal?
Oh, that's even more challenging. I have to say, no, Portuguese is going to take a little while. I think, yeah, it's going to take quite a commitment for myself to really learn it. My wife's actively learning it right now, but hopefully one day I'll be able to speak German. That's the
That's
first step, I
impressive.
think.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Being multilingual is it's one of the things that is not easy, but once you accomplish it, that's when you understand that you can say the same thing in two or three different languages. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think someone said something to me when I first came to Germany, which is they're quite surprised why I didn't learn German, and I was nonchalant about it. But I think the statement they made is that when you speak a different language, you really do learn to think a different way, because vocabulary and the way we speak really drives our thinking of problems and things like that. And this statement really struck out with me. And I believe there's a lot to think about there. And you can really relate that idea to really thinking about programming as a language, right? So
Hmm.
typically engineers will think about a problem in a certain way. A marketing person would think about something in another way. And just thinking about the different ways to think about the same thing, it's insane. So your language and your vocabulary does dictate your ability to adapt to different situations.
That's good to know. So, question regarding products. So, many companies are now adapting product management into their product development operations. What is the role of product management in your estimation, and what are some of the best approaches to implementing it for companies that may be unfamiliar with the concept?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of external forces here that will kind of define my answer and bring a bit clarity to it. So, at the highest level, I think product management, simply put, is just you want to create you want to find opportunities to create impact in a company. Opportunity is defined as expected impact divided by cost over time. And impact is defined as moving a key metric that matters to your company. Sometimes that's revenue, sometimes that's user growth, sometimes that's retention, whatever. So you're always looking for opportunities to create impact. That is the main and top priority of a product manager in any role at any company. Um, the forces at play, though, and one kind of movement you can clearly see in technology is that writing code and building products, creating features, and building companies, it's just so much easier. And every single month, I think that trend only accelerates.
Hmm.
So building an Airbnb, let's say product today, it's very possible within a few weeks, right? So all these things, they make the development part of product management easier, which then begs the question that if you are saving time and resources on the engineering piece of the work, what should you be spending that additional time on, right? And so that is always about looking for opportunities to create additional impact. And because of this, one thing that I think a product manager should always be is extremely flexible and adaptable to the scenario. And
Uh-huh.
oftentimes we think of product managers owning a singular product for an infinite amount of time. But I think that world is not the case anymore. And if you look at any product manager, their career typically they're changing products every year or even 6 months. And definitely 2 years. It's very rare to see one person work on one product for more than 2 years. And that's because our ability to context switch, our ability to develop different features and use different technology is just accelerated. So it accelerates our need to be stagnant in the things we're thinking about day to day.
Great. What strategic recommendations can you share with us on how to go about building a robust product vision that a company can follow so that their product vision aligns with the company's strategic visions?
Yeah, I think the best way to do this is actually to think about all your functions in a company: HR, marketing, sales, product, engineering, and you really want to align everyone on the company strategy. And that is critical because I think traditionally we've always run companies as a society as there's a company and then there are different skill sets, and those skill sets do their own functions, and then we contribute to the overall success of the company. But I think what you will see with more modern companies is that every single function exists for the same vision as the overall company. And so skill sets, departments, and org structures become less important, which is why you see so much innovation in organizational structures in general. There are companies with no org design, which is the extreme case. And there are some that have an org structure that changes every
Hmm.
year or every 6 months. And clearly, you can see that the most innovative companies constantly review these things. So I think to build a quote unquote product strategy, number one, you need to build a compelling company strategy. And all functions don't think about contribution to that strategy, but they think about themselves as that strategy and as that vision. And I think that is the key way to prevent any kind of siloed thinking. It'll also just prevent a lot of strong contention discussions of, is it good for the product, is it good for the business. You need to kind of align those things at the very beginning, at the very impetus of your company, because that just makes decision making so much faster, which then creates higher velocity in output as an entire organization.
You've said something quite interesting there that, some organizations tend to change their, reporting structure every 6 months or every year. Is that something that has shown value to the product management industry, in your opinion?
Yes, I think there is a growing trend um, that it feels like if you have a strong individual product manager,
Uh-huh.
that person can solve a huge variety of different problems. That person can go into a problem space and deduce a solution, even if the problem and the solution is not technical or engineering or even technology. And I think that's interesting because if you think about every function from HR to finance, everything is getting productized and every function has a ton of products to use, which is interesting. Even customer service, there's a million and one customer chat applications as an option. So when you have all of these things as technologies that enable higher productivity in your functions, the general idea comes up of, well, you probably want someone who understands how these products work and how you can leverage them to the best of your ability. And so with product managers, I think a very strong product manager has the ability to context switch, but really identify problems at a first principle level and come up with solutions that are high velocity and low effort. And so high leverage outcomes. And so I think product managers, and you'll see this now, you'll see titles of product manager, PPC, which is a pay performance thing. You'll see product managers for HR tools. You'll see product managers for internal tools. You see product managers for internal finance tools. So the list goes on, which just shows you that the title of a product manager is such a versatile and a wide topic that you can really apply to almost any single thing in a company. So longer term, as technology gets better and faster and more people are able to use it, I think more roles inside of a company would just become a product manager type role, which becomes a general manager just with an idea of how to kind of problem solve.
When doing a product roadmap review, how do you ensure that there are no upstream or downstream disconnects across the company? Because this tends to happen a lot, especially when you have those siloed kind of organizations where this department is doing something one way, but they're not sharing that information with the other department. How do you prevent that in the product management world?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of holistic way to think about this problem, and then there are some tactical slash technical ones. So the very first kind of high level piece is that simply like as I mentioned earlier, companies think of their company as different departments, and this already sets that imaginary silo that you can think of. It already exists from the day you think about departments. I'm not
Hmm.
saying don't have departments, don't have reporting lines, but the very fact that people lean on that as such a main and key thing, that's a problem. So what you'll see is many companies, including all the ones I've worked at, you start trying to create cross-functional working teams with departmental reporting lines. So you have the reporting lines to maintain a career path, training, guidance, standards. But the actual day-to-day work is cross-functional. You have data scientists working with engineers, working with product managers, working with designers, working with a UX person, working with a copywriter, working with a brand person. And that is the most modern kind of org structure I've seen, which seems to exist in some of the coolest companies in the world. So that's kind of at the holistic level. You have to get your company so familiar with the concept of cross functionality and don't even worry about the department piece of the company. That's the first step. The second piece, which is a bit more tactical, and it's a bit silly to say, but there are still many companies that use Excel files, Word docs to manage all this stuff. I
Uh-huh.
mean, the first thing you want to do is put all this crap in the cloud. Just having a shared place physically to have all your crap, that actually solves a huge part of the problem. And I know it seems silly to some people, especially startups that are like 5, 10 people, but at bigger companies, it's actually really hard to mobilize this kind of data and this way of working into the cloud and start thinking about everything as a shared doc. And once you get to that point, everything becomes physically easier to manage.
Great. Customer feedback is vital to any part of a business, let alone in product. And collecting data has now become a core mission of companies that aim to adapt with changing conditions as they relate to their customers. How can product teams ensure that they're incorporating customer feedback data so that they can make well-informed decisions? And for this question, I was thinking more like from an AI perspective, if that's something that's applicable.
Um, so yeah, I think you always have to be very careful when asking customers questions about what their experience is. I think it's an amazing barometer to understand directionally if your company is doing the right thing. But I think it can be very dangerous to use this as a way to define features. What I like to think about is when I think about user interviews and just UX research in general, is that it is one layer of a multi-layer process to define true problems which have true solutions. So you might start with data analysis of your user analytics, and you're going, okay, well, people are going from this step to that step, but they're leaving on step three. So you're like, okay, what is the reason? You probably wouldn't know just looking at a bunch of data. So
Right.
what you then would do is then you would spin up the same group, go through a UX kind of interview, get that user feedback, generate that. And then from that learning, you go back to data analytics and you try to see where the commonalities lie. And so a way to think about it is you stack the data analytics piece, the user survey piece, and then you look at the landscape. So this is the competitor analysis. When you stack those three on top of each other, what you'll see is some commonalities that come from that, which then help you define a more high probability roadmap of success. And so I think that's kind of the way it should be used. Now, in terms of AI, what I think AI, I think is not special in the sense that it is anything unique. It is just like any other feature or functionality. So you want to think about it as a tool to solve a problem. But the
Mhm.
hardest thing in a business is actually to identify the problems. But the solutions are often actually easy if you truly understand the real problem. So I spend most of my time defining the right problem statement and very little time actually defining a solution because there's more than enough ideas and solutions out there.
What type of qualitative and quantitative data should product teams focus on collecting to achieve um, this kind of desired outcome?
Yeah, I think traditionally what product teams might think about is a funnel. And so that funnel is from, a person lands on site to when person makes a purchase or some kind of key interaction. And they look at all the steps there. Product teams should still look at that. But I think what has changed now is that product teams need to look at not just the beginning, the end, but the expanded edges. So even before a user gets to your site, a product manager should really understand how they got to that site and why. So that could be understanding paid performance marketing. That could be understanding CRM or SEO or whatever these other functions that feel external. But a product manager should see and understand the experience the user goes through in those steps before they even get into the quote unquote funnel. And what happens after you make an acquisition, product managers need to understand how do you take that acquisition piece and that conversion at the end, and how do you turn that back into a loop that powers the initial channels?
Mhm.
That is the way companies should really think about these things. You move away from the funnel and you move more into a loop thinking. And that is powerful because you will stop thinking about the user as it's a user that I care about only if they touch this page. And what you start thinking about is the whole journey. And when you do that, the insights and the ideas and the impactful things that you could do become much more obvious.
I have a question that deals with something that many startups usually face, and it relates to differentiation. What strategic insights can you recommend on how product teams or startups can go about achieving differentiation that will separate their product from the existing ones from the competition?
So, with any feature, any product, or any company, it always starts with the same statement, which is what is the problem you're trying to solve?
Mhm.
So, if you take two companies that are doing the exact same thing, so let's just say there's two companies selling shoes. Let's not even talk about tech companies, let's talk about just normal companies. So, if you think about two companies that sell shoes, and let's say they both sell athletic shoes, on paper, everything is the same except for one thing, the brand, right? So this first step is, yeah, you can differentiate your company by creating a brand. And even in tech companies, lots of tech companies survive because their brand is stronger than other tech companies, right?
Right.
Now, the problem with brand is it's so expensive. It's so expensive and so hard to measure over time, but people know it works, but it is technically very hard to measure and very hard to measure investment. So then what you start thinking about is, well, if you have two shoe companies, neither one are solving every single problem that anybody who ever wears an athletic shoe would have. So then what you see is one shoe company might go, well, we're going to build a better shoe just for people who play basketball, or just for people who play ping pong, or just for people who play badminton. And what you'll see is that when you start focusing on a niche group that has a big problem that the other players are ignoring, then what you do is you create these new categories. So that's a very kind of like spinning up new audiences. However, what you could also do is still focus on the same audience. So let's assume both these shoe companies are basketball shoe companies. Well, if one company said, well, why don't we optimize the experience for really, really, really tall basketball players? And we don't accommodate for shorter players. And then so what you start doing is you start thinking about all the problems that a person who's really tall wearing an athletic shoe, what kind of problems they experience. And you can kind of apply this thought to any tech company, right? So
Mhm.
think about food delivery because there's so many players out there. Well, the first thing food companies did was go, okay, well, what other things can we deliver? Right. So then you get groceries, you get drinks. Now you can get ice cream delivered. You can get a tea delivered now. So you start expanding all this stuff out, and what you'll see is no one solves all the problems in the world because there are so many, and every problem can become a company. Every problem can become a feature, and every problem can become a successful business. But it always starts with problems.
I'd like to know, when you're hiring for your teams, do you tend to get creative with the interview questioning, or what exactly do you look for in the people that you interview for working in your teams?
Um, I think it's definitely true for product managers, but it's probably true for any person I hire. What
Mhm.
I'm always looking for is I'm looking for someone who I'm not typically looking for a traditional product manager. What I'm looking for is an entrepreneur with some product management skills. Because I think the product management in the traditional sense is actually something that you can teach, that people can learn, is a
Mhm.
technical skill, there's a process. But mindset and being relentlessly resourceful is very hard to train. That is experience, that is thought process, that's attitude, that's upbringing, that's network, that's so many things that it's hard to build that. And mindset is harder to build than physical, technical skills, right? So I typically try to find the right cultural fit as the main thing I'm looking for. And then the actual product management experience, I'm a little less specific on. So that is the key when I'm hiring any role. Some A way I kind of like to get into the mind of how someone thinks about being resourceful is I typically have all my product manager candidates and pretty much everybody take a business case test. And my business cases are very simple. I give them an imaginary company and I ask them to tell me how they would grow it by X% in 1 year. And that's the entire case. And what I like to see is I like to see people who really think outside the box. They really think about all the ways they can grow a company, all the things they should try to do. And what you'll see is they'll kind of apply their own level of prioritization. And most importantly, they apply their own level of creativity to it. As a really tangible example, the case I give is, you run a company that does delivery for desserts in Cape Town, and I pick a random city.
Uh-huh.
And I've had so many applicants fill this business case out. And some of the most creative answers I've ever heard is that someone came back with a report that said, you don't need to build this company. You don't need to do anything because the average income in Cape Town is increasing by X% every year. So by nature, your business will grow. Now, that was an amazing business. That's an amazing answer to the problem, because that's the kind of thing I like people to think about is beyond the product and the features and the UI. They need to think about the business and the environment. So, of course, have guys come up with great growth strategies and super cool features and all this kind of stuff. But it's the guys that think very wide that really understand how to get this stuff done.
That's very impressive. Now, is this something that you normally ask during the interview, like before the interview starts, or is that like something that they just provide to you when they come for the interview?
So the kind of first piece of the interview is just a quick introductory call with myself. So I just like to get to know a person in a very casual way. I like to know how they think about their day work. But typically a business case like that, it's the second interview. And typically you're given a week to kind of fill it out and go through your presentation, all that stuff. And then we do a kind of group panel interview where we ask questions about the thinking and the mindset.
I really like that. That's something that I think a lot of companies can adapt. Um, I come from a project management background, and I'm curious to know how can how can project management and product management teams collaborate together within a given project or product development? What's the most efficient way for this type of collaboration to be successful, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think there's probably many kind of frameworks out there to talk about this classic partnership. Um, I like to think about it in a bit more pragmatic way. It's that the role itself, the two roles, product management and project management, serve kind of two functions. So the product manager does a lot of project management, but himself is not project management in entire wide real estate. So the way I think about it is within the kind of technology and product and UX kind of function, the product manager, project management's all of that. But the project manager is the one who really assists and brings in all the external pieces that need to happen, right? So sometimes there's involvement from legal or finance or sales. And the project management piece of it plays a big part in making sure those things are driven at the same pace as the development. I think in a fast moving younger company, what you typically have is the product manager will do all of it. And I think that's an expected thing for myself as well.
Right,
However, when you're talking about mobilizing a 300-person project, you're probably going to need project managers to help coordinate all that. So
right.
I think there's a bit about scale here, and it just depends on how many people you need to coordinate. And the wider that gets, the less one product manager can be scalable. So I think it's really you adapt the skill sets to the actual scale of the problem.
Last question, and this is one of my favorite questions that I ask all my guests. What has helped you to get to where you are, and what word of advice would you give to someone that wants to pursue a career that's identical to yours?
Um, I think that thing that's helped me the most is I don't know where this comes from, but I think always being extremely optimistic about everything really helps in life. And if I think about 2020 as a great example, literally one of the worst years that I've ever been alive. I can't
I
really
think
think of a worse one, to be
we
honest.
can all agree on that.
Yeah. But yet, I look back at it and I can only see the kind of great things that have happened for me personally and for life and just in general. And so I think staying extremely optimistic and aggressive about optimism is very powerful.
Mhm.
And I think within a project in a company, when you're working on something, even if your contribution is small to a project, but your optimism for it is high, that really shows through. And that makes it so that you are just a much more enjoyable person to work with. It's
Right.
really that simple. So showing optimism and motivation to really do something well, this is infectious. So not only do you increase the likelihood of people wanting to continue to work with you, it also increases the likelihood that people work with you productively. And what you'll see is that the relationships that you build at an individual contributor level are the relationships that move you further in your career later. So I always spend a lot of time staying optimistic. I spend a lot of time making sure other people feel optimistic. But most importantly, I'm always trying to help people. And I never think about the payback. I I give people feedback on the resumes every single week. Anyone who sends it to me, any stranger, I'll review it. Anybody who wants to help, interview better, I do that. And because I've always done this as a principle for the last like 7 years, the majority of the positions I've been offered or people contact me from, they come from referrals of people who are working as product managers in those companies. And that's not because I'm amazing at product management. I just think it's because I prefer to have this guy in the company working with me, going for any problem that we might foresee. So I think you always want to just be giving back as much as you can to anybody you ever meet. You always want to be open for conversations, open for coffees, open for Zoom calls. You just need to be available, and all that stuff will pay back 100x in your life.
Always important to give back. Johnny, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks a lot for taking the time to be with us. I cannot wait to catch up with you in the near future.
Absolutely. Pleasure.